Question 1. Analysis of a private pilot helicopter's pre-flight planning process reveals a reliance on a popular flight planning software application. While the software indicates favorable weather conditions and a clear route, the pilot has not independently verified the latest aviation weather reports from official sources or cross-referenced the flight plan with current NOTAM for the intended destination airport and en route airspace. Which of the following approaches best demonstrates regulatory compliance and professional judgment in this scenario? Option A. The pilot should prioritize obtaining a weather briefing from an automated service, which is often integrated into flight planning software, and consider NOTAM only if they appear to significantly alter the planned route. Option B. The pilot should independently access and review official aviation weather reports, e.g., METR, TAF, and thoroughly examine all relevant NOTAM for the destination and en route areas, using the flight planning software as a supplementary tool for route visualization and initial data aggregation. Option C. The pilot should trust the flight planning software's integrated weather and NOTAM data, assuming it is sufficiently up-to-date and comprehensive for a private pilot helicopter flight. Option D. The pilot should proceed with the flight as planned by the software, as long as visual flight rules, VFR, conditions are forecast, and address any potential issues encountered during the flight. The correct answer is B. The pilot should independently access and review official aviation weather reports, e.g., METR, TAF, and thoroughly examine all relevant NOTAM for the destination and en route areas, using the flight planning software as a supplementary tool for route visualization and initial data aggregation. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a pilot to synthesize information from multiple, potentially conflicting sources to ensure flight safety and regulatory compliance. The pilot must not only access, but also critically interpret data from flight planning software, aviation weather reports, NOTAM, and navigation charts. The core challenge lies in prioritizing and integrating this information, especially when it presents ambiguities or potential hazards. A deep understanding of the regulatory framework is paramount, as failure to comply can lead to enforcement actions and compromise safety. The correct approach involves a systematic and thorough review of all available resources, prioritizing official aviation weather products and NOTAM for critical operational decisions. This approach is right because it directly aligns with regulatory requirements for pre-flight planning and in-flight decision-making. Specifically, regulations mandate that pilots obtain a weather briefing, review NOTAM, and plan a safe route. Utilizing flight planning software aids in this process by consolidating information, but it is not a substitute for understanding the underlying data and regulatory implications. Aviation weather resources provide the most authoritative and up-to-date information on atmospheric conditions, which are a primary factor in flight safety. Understanding NOTAM is crucial as they highlight temporary changes to facilities, services, or procedures that could impact flight operations. Sectional charts and other navigation tools are essential for maintaining situational awareness and executing the planned flight. An incorrect approach that relies solely on flight planning software without cross-referencing official weather and NOTAM fails to meet regulatory obligations. Flight planning software may not always incorporate the most current or comprehensive weather data or all relevant NOTAM, leading to a potentially unsafe or non-compliant flight. Another incorrect approach that disregards specific NOTAM impacting a planned route or airport, even if the weather appears favorable, is a direct violation of regulations requiring pilots to be aware of and comply with such notices. This demonstrates a failure to exercise due diligence and a disregard for critical safety information. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes convenience over thoroughness, such as a cursory glance at weather without understanding its implications for the specific aircraft and route, also represents a significant regulatory and safety failure. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a structured process. First, identify all relevant regulatory requirements for pre-flight planning. Second, gather all necessary information from approved sources, whether NOTAM, charts, flight planning tools. Third, analyze this information for potential hazards and conflicts. Fourth, make a go/no-go decision based on safety and compliance. And finally, continuously monitor and reevaluate information throughout the flight. Question 2. The investigation demonstrates that a private pilot, during pre-flight inspection of a helicopter, notices a slight, unusual vibration emanating from the tail rotor system that was not present on previous flights. The pilot is aware that addressing this could lead to significant maintenance costs and a delay in their planned recreational flight. The pilot considers whether to proceed with the flight, believing the vibration is minor and unlikely to cause immediate problems, or to report it and potentially cancel the flight. Option A. Discuss the vibration with other pilots at the airfield to gauge their opinion on whether it is safe to fly before making a decision. Option B. Proceed with the flight, assuming the vibration is insignificant, and plan to have it checked by maintenance after the flight if it persists or worsens. Option C. Attempt a minor adjustment to the tail rotor pitch linkage based on a memory of a similar situation described by another pilot, without consulting maintenance. Option D. Report the unusual vibration to certified maintenance personnel immediately and refrain from flying until the issue is thoroughly inspected and rectified, regardless of the perceived minor nature of the vibration or potential costs. The correct answer is D. Report the unusual vibration to certified maintenance personnel immediately and refrain from flying until the issue is thoroughly inspected and rectified, regardless of the perceived minor nature of the vibration or potential costs. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the pilot's direct responsibility for the safe operation of the aircraft and the potential conflict between personal financial interests and the duty of care to passengers and the public. The pilot must exercise sound judgment, prioritizing safety and regulatory compliance above all else. The ethical dilemma arises from the temptation to overlook a minor issue to avoid costly repairs or delays, which could compromise the integrity of critical helicopter systems. The correct approach involves immediately reporting the observed anomaly to the appropriate maintenance personnel and grounding the aircraft until the issue is rectified. This aligns with the fundamental ethical obligation of a pilot to ensure the airworthiness of the aircraft before flight. Specifically, regulations mandate that pilots conduct thorough pre-flight inspections and report any discrepancies that could affect the safe operation of the aircraft. Failure to do so constitutes a violation of piloting command responsibilities and potentially breaches airworthiness directives. This approach upholds the principle of safety first and demonstrates a commitment to professional integrity. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the slight vibration as insignificant and proceed with the flight. This fails to acknowledge the potential for a minor issue to escalate into a critical failure, especially within complex rotor or transmission systems. Ethically, it prioritizes convenience or financial considerations over passenger safety and regulatory compliance. This approach violates the pilot's duty to report all known defects and could lead to severe consequences, including accidents and loss of life. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt a temporary, unauthorized fix without consulting certified maintenance personnel. This bypasses established safety protocols and could lead to improper repairs, further compromising the aircraft systems. It demonstrates a lack of respect for the expertise of maintenance professionals and a disregard for the strict procedures governing aircraft maintenance and airworthiness. This action directly contravenes regulations that require all maintenance to be performed by authorized individuals and documented appropriately. A final incorrect approach would be to consult with other pilots for informal advice on whether to fly, rather than reporting the issue through official channels. While peer consultation can be valuable, it does not absolve the pilot of their ultimate responsibility. Relying on anecdotal advice instead of adhering to established reporting procedures for maintenance issues is a failure to follow the prescribed safety management system. This approach undermines the integrity of the maintenance reporting system and could lead to a situation where a known defect is not properly addressed, jeopardizing flight safety. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear, systematic approach. 1. Recognize the potential safety implication of any observed anomaly. 2. Consult the aircraft's maintenance manual and relevant regulations to understand the criticality of the observed issue. 3. Report the anomaly through the established official channels to certified maintenance personnel. 4. Do not operate the aircraft if there is any doubt about its airworthiness. 5. Document all actions taken and communications regarding the issue. Question 3. During the evaluation of a planned cross-country helicopter flight, a private pilot is reviewing available aviation weather products. Which approach best demonstrates a thorough understanding of weather hazards and regulatory requirements for ensuring flight safety? Option A. Prioritizing the review of a graphical weather product that highlights areas of significant turbulence and icing potential. Cross-referencing this with current METR for the departure and destination, and considering the forecast wind aloft for performance calculations. Option B, focusing exclusively on the current METR for the departure airport, assuming that if conditions are good there, the rest of the route will be acceptable. Option C, reviewing only the forecast wind speed and direction from a TAF, as this is the most critical factor for helicopter flight planning. Option D, relying solely on a general aviation weather overview that provides broad regional conditions, but lacks specific details on convective activity or low-level wind shear. Correct answer is A, prioritizing the review of a graphical weather product that highlights areas of significant turbulence and icing potential, cross-referencing this with current METR for the departure and destination, and considering the forecast wind aloft for performance calculations. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because a private pilot helicopter operator must balance the desire to fly with the paramount responsibility of ensuring the safety of the flight, passengers, and aircraft. Misinterpreting or underestimating weather information can lead to hazardous situations, including encountering severe turbulence, icing conditions, or reduced visibility, all of which are critical risks for helicopter operations. The pilot's judgment in selecting the most appropriate aviation weather product for a specific operational decision is crucial. The correct approach involves utilizing a combination of current weather reports and forecasts, specifically focusing on products that provide detailed information relevant to low-level helicopter flight. This includes understanding METR for current conditions at the departure and destination airports, and TAFs for forecast conditions. Crucially, for a helicopter pilot, understanding the implications of atmospheric pressure, temperature, wind, and moisture on aircraft performance and potential hazards like icing and thunderstorms is vital. Aviation weather services provide a suite of products, and selecting the one that best addresses the specific operational context, such as potential for convective activity or low-level wind shear, is a hallmark of professional decision-making. This aligns with the general principles of aviation safety and the regulatory requirement to ensure the aircraft is airworthy and the flight can be conducted safely, which implicitly includes understanding and mitigating weather-related risks. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on a single, potentially less detailed weather product, such as a general aviation weather overview without considering specific local conditions or forecasts. This fails to provide the necessary granularity for safe helicopter operations, especially when dealing with dynamic weather phenomena. Another incorrect approach is to disregard forecast information in favor of current conditions, which ignores the potential for rapidly changing weather and the need for proactive planning. Furthermore, neglecting to consider the impact of temperature and pressure on helicopter performance, or failing to adequately assess the risk of thunderstorms or icing based on available reports and forecasts, represents a significant lapse in professional judgment and a failure to meet the implicit safety obligations. Professional decision-making in this context requires a systematic process. First, identify the operational objective, e.g., a specific flight route and time. Second, gather all relevant weather information, including METR, TAF, PIRE, and any available graphical products like radar or satellite imagery. Third, analyze this information in the context of the helicopter's performance capabilities and the specific hazards associated with the planned flight path and altitude. Fourth, make a go/no-go decision based on a conservative assessment of the weather risks. If the weather is marginal, consider alternative plans, such as delaying the flight, altering the route, or obtaining additional weather information. Question 4. Market research demonstrates that a significant number of private pilot helicopter candidates struggle with conceptualizing emergency procedures. Considering an unexpected total loss of engine power at a low altitude during cruise flight, which of the following approaches best reflects the immediate, critical actions a pilot must take to ensure the highest probability of a safe outcome, based on the principles of aerodynamics and regulatory guidance for emergency operations? Option A. Attempt to troubleshoot and restart the engine while continuing to fly towards the intended destination, hoping for a successful restart before significant altitude is lost. Option B. Immediately establish a stable auto-rotation by adjusting cyclic and collective to maintain appropriate rotor RPM and a safe airspeed, while simultaneously identifying the most suitable landing area within reach. Option C. Immediately lower the collective to its lowest position to conserve any residual rotor inertia and attempt to glide as far as possible before initiating any other control inputs. Option D. Focus on maintaining a specific airspeed that is known to provide the longest glide distance without immediate concern for rotor RPM, and continue towards a predetermined, potentially distant landing site. Correct answer is B. Immediately establish a stable auto-rotation by adjusting cyclic and collective to maintain appropriate rotor RPM and a safe airspeed, while simultaneously identifying the most suitable landing area within reach. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a pilot to make a critical decision regarding aircraft safety and operational integrity under conditions that deviate from normal flight. The pilot must balance the immediate need to continue a flight with the potential risks associated with an unusual aerodynamic state. Careful judgment is required to assess the situation, understand the underlying aerodynamic principles, and apply regulatory knowledge to ensure the safety of the flight. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of auto-rotation principles and a proactive, conservative response to the loss of engine power. This approach prioritizes safety by immediately initiating the established emergency procedure for engine failure. Specifically, it involves maintaining appropriate rotor RPM within the designed limits for auto-rotation, establishing a safe airspeed to maximize glide distance and control, and selecting a suitable landing area. This aligns with the fundamental regulatory requirement for pilots to operate aircraft safely and to be proficient in emergency procedures, as mandated by aviation authorities. The ethical obligation to protect passengers and the aircraft dictates a decisive and correct response to an emergency. An incorrect approach of attempting to restart the engine without first establishing a stable auto-rotation is professionally unacceptable. This fails to address the immediate and critical threat of a total loss of lift if rotor RPM decays too far. It introduces an unnecessary risk of a catastrophic loss of control. Furthermore, delaying the initiation of auto-rotation directly contravenes established emergency protocols designed to mitigate the consequences of engine failure, thereby violating the pilot's duty of care. Another incorrect approach of attempting to fly to a distant, potentially unsuitable landing site while not in a stable auto-rotation is also professionally flawed. This decision prioritizes reaching a specific location over maintaining safe flight parameters. It ignores the fundamental aerodynamic reality that without engine power, the helicopter's ability to maneuver and control its descent rate is severely limited. This approach risks exceeding the helicopter's glide capability and landing in an uncontrolled manner, increasing the likelihood of damage or injury. Demonstrates a failure to prioritize immediate safety and adherence to emergency procedures. Finally, an incorrect approach of focusing solely on maintaining a specific airspeed without considering rotor RPM is dangerous. While airspeed is crucial for auto-rotation, it is only one component of a stable auto-rotation. If rotor RPM is not maintained within the acceptable range, the helicopter will lose lift and control, regardless of airspeed. This approach shows a partial understanding of auto-rotation, but a critical failure to integrate all necessary parameters for a safe emergency landing, thus failing to meet the comprehensive safety standards required by aviation regulations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear, systematic approach to emergency management. This includes 1. Aviate. Maintain control of the aircraft. 2. Navigate. Determine the best course of action and destination. 3. Communicate. Inform relevant parties if time and circumstances permit. In this specific scenario, aviate translates to immediately establishing a stable auto-rotation. Navigate involves selecting the most suitable landing area within glide range. This structured approach, grounded in regulatory requirements and ethical responsibilities, ensures that the pilot addresses the most critical threats first and makes informed decisions to maximize safety. Question 5. The monitoring system demonstrates a malfunction in the aircraft's transponder, specifically the altitude reporting capability, while operating under Visual Flight Rules (VFR). The pilot has not received any specific instructions from Air Traffic Control Act regarding this issue. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the pilot? Option A. Attempt to troubleshoot and reset the transponder while continuing to navigate. Option B. Descend to an altitude below 10,000 feet MSL to avoid potential airspace restrictions. Option C. Continue the flight as planned, noting the malfunction for post-flight maintenance. Option D. Immediately cease VFR flight and proceed to the nearest suitable airport. Correct answer is C. Continue the flight as planned, noting the malfunction for post-flight maintenance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the pilot's responsibility to maintain situational awareness regarding airspace restrictions and the operational status of their aircraft, particularly when operating under visual flight rules, VFR. The pilot must exercise sound judgment to ensure compliance with federal aviation regulations, FAR, while prioritizing safety. The core of the challenge lies in interpreting potentially conflicting information and making a timely, compliant decision. The correct approach involves immediately ceasing VFR flight and proceeding to the nearest suitable airport. This is the most professionally sound decision because it directly addresses the detected anomaly in the aircraft's transponder system. FAR 91, 115B. 2 requires aircraft operating in Class B, C, or D airspace, or in Class E airspace above 10,000 feet MSL, to have a Mode C transponder and an altitude reporting capability. While the question doesn't explicitly state the airspace, the implication of a transponder anomaly suggests a potential need for such equipment. Furthermore, FAR 91, 213 addresses inoperative equipment. If the transponder is required for the airspace, or if its failure compromises the safety of flight or ATC separation, the pilot must take appropriate action, which often includes landing as soon as practicable. The nearest suitable airport ensures the pilot minimizes further risk and allows for inspection and repair of the aircraft. This approach prioritizes regulatory compliance and safety above all else. An incorrect approach would be to continue the flight as planned, assuming the anomaly is minor or will resolve itself. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure because it disregards the potential implications of a malfunctioning transponder. If the aircraft is in airspace where a functioning transponder is mandatory, continuing flight constitutes a violation of FAR 91, 215. Even if not strictly required by airspace, a malfunctioning transponder can impede air traffic control's ability to track the aircraft, increasing the risk of a mid-air collision, a direct contravention of the pilot's fundamental duty to ensure the safety of flight. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to troubleshoot the transponder in flight while continuing to navigate. This is professionally unacceptable as it divides the pilot's attention between critical flight tasks and equipment repair. FAR 91, 103 mandates that pilots be familiar with all available information concerning the flight, including aircraft systems. Attempting repairs in flight, especially without specific training or procedures for such an action, can lead to pilot distraction and a loss of situational awareness, potentially resulting in a deviation from planned course or altitude, or even entering hazardous airspace or weather. A final incorrect approach would be to descend to a lower altitude to avoid airspace where a transponder might be required without landing. While this might seem like an attempt to comply with airspace requirements, it is still a failure. The primary issue is the inoperative transponder, which is an aircraft equipment issue. The pilot has a responsibility to operate airworthy aircraft. Simply changing altitude to avoid a rule does not rectify the underlying problem with the aircraft's equipment and could still lead to unforeseen hazards or interactions with other aircraft or air traffic control. The safest and most compliant action is to land. The professional decision-making process for similar situations involves a systematic assessment of the situation. Identify the problem, transponder anomaly, determine its potential regulatory implications, airspace requirements, aircraft equipment rules, assess the immediate safety risks, loss of ATC visibility, potential collision, and then select the course of action that most effectively mitigates those risks while ensuring regulatory compliance. This often means prioritizing landing over continuing the flight when critical equipment malfunctions. Question 6. Comparative studies suggest that when faced with a perceived minor deviation from planned flight conditions, such as a slight increase in headwinds or a marginal fuel reserve, a private helicopter pilot's decision-making process is most robust when it prioritizes which of the following. Option A. Dismissing the deviation as insignificant, focusing solely on reaching the intended destination without further analysis. Option B. A systematic evaluation of the deviation against established safety margins, personal minimums, and available resources to determine the safest course of action, including potential diversion or landing. Option C. Making an immediate, unverified decision to divert to the nearest suitable airfield based on a subjective assessment of the situation. Option D. continuing the flight as planned, assuming the deviation is within acceptable personal tolerance for comfort and convenience. Correct answer is B. A systematic evaluation of the deviation against established safety margins, personal minimums, and available resources to determine the safest course of action, including potential diversion or landing. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for private helicopter pilots, balancing personal comfort and convenience with the paramount responsibility of flight safety. The temptation to deviate from a planned route due to perceived minor inconveniences, such as weather or fuel concerns, is a significant threat to situational awareness and risk management. The pilot must critically evaluate the perceived threat against the established safety margins and operational limitations, resisting the urge to make impulsive decisions driven by comfort or time pressure. This requires a robust application of human factors principles to maintain objective judgment. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic evaluation of the situation using established threat and error management (TEM) principles. This begins with identifying the perceived threat, e.g., deteriorating weather, fuel status, and assessing its potential impact on the flight. The pilot then considers available options, weighing the risks and benefits of each against the original flight plan and personal minimums. This includes consulting available resources like weather reports, air traffic control, and potentially making a decision to divert or land if safety is compromised. This methodical process directly aligns with regulatory requirements for safe flight operations, emphasizing proactive risk assessment and decision-making to prevent errors and maintain situational awareness. The pilot's commitment to adhering to established safety protocols and personal minimums, even when inconvenient, is a cornerstone of responsible aviation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves prioritizing personal convenience over safety by continuing the flight, despite clear indications of deteriorating conditions or insufficient fuel. This demonstrates a failure in risk management and situational awareness, potentially leading to an uncontrolled descent into hazardous conditions or a fuel emergency. It violates the fundamental principle of aviate, navigate, communicate by neglecting critical safety considerations. Another incorrect approach is to make a hasty, unverified decision to divert based on incomplete information or a gut feeling without consulting available resources. This can lead to a worse outcome if the diversion itself introduces new, unmanaged risks. It signifies a breakdown in workload management and error management, as the pilot fails to gather sufficient data for an informed decision. A third incorrect approach is to dismiss potential threats as minor inconveniences without a thorough assessment of their cumulative impact. This reflects a lack of adherence to TEM principles and a failure to maintain a high level of vigilance. It can lead to complacency and an underestimation of risks, ultimately compromising flight safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals in aviation employ a structured decision-making process, often referred to as the loop or cycle of decision-making. This involves 1. Perceiving the situation, gathering information, assessing current state. 2. Evaluating the situation, identifying threats, assessing risks, considering options. 3. Deciding on a course of action. 4. Implementing the decision. 5. Reviewing the outcome. In this context, a pilot must continuously cycle through these steps, especially when faced with unexpected challenges. The core of professional decision-making lies in maintaining objective judgment, prioritizing safety above all else, and utilizing all available resources and training to manage threats effectively. Question 7. The evaluation methodology shows that during a simulated instrument approach, the pilot observes the attitude indicator showing a slight left bank, while the turn coordinator indicates a coordinated turn to the left. Simultaneously, the magnetic compass shows a steady heading. The pilot also notes a slight increase in airspeed on the airspeed indicator and a steady altitude on the altimeter. Which of the following represents the most professional and regulatory compliant interpretation and course of action? Option A. Assume the attitude indicator is unreliable due to potential instrument errors and focus solely on maintaining wings level using the turn coordinator and magnetic compass. Option B. Recognize that the attitude indicator and turn coordinator are in agreement for a left turn, and cross-reference the magnetic compass and airspeed indicator for confirmation of a stable, coordinated turn, proceeding with the approach. Option C. Immediately disengage the autopilot, if engaged, and rely solely on the magnetic compass for heading, while making control inputs to level the wings based on the attitude indicator. Option D. Trust the attitude indicator and turn coordinator, assuming the magnetic compass and airspeed indicator are experiencing minor fluctuations due to the maneuver. The correct answer is D. Trust the attitude indicator and turn coordinator, assuming the magnetic compass and airspeed indicator are experiencing minor fluctuations due to the maneuver. Explanation: the evaluation methodology shows that a private pilot helicopter student is undergoing instrument proficiency checks. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the pilot to demonstrate not only theoretical knowledge of flight instruments, but also the practical application of that knowledge under simulated adverse conditions, adhering strictly to regulatory standards. The pilot must interpret instrument indications accurately, understand their limitations, and make sound decisions based on this information, all while maintaining aircraft control. The pressure of a check-ride environment can exacerbate the difficulty, demanding a high level of composure and precision. The correct approach involves a systematic and accurate interpretation of all relevant flight instruments to assess the aircraft's attitude, altitude, airspeed, and vertical and horizontal movement. This includes recognizing potential instrument errors and limitations and cross-referencing instruments to ensure a coherent picture of the aircraft's state. For instance, when faced with a potential instrument failure or erroneous reading, the pilot must be able to identify the anomaly, understand its implications, and revert to reliable instruments or procedures as dictated by regulations. This demonstrates a thorough understanding of the private pilot helicopter syllabus and adherence to the principles of instrument flight, ensuring safety of flight. Specifically, regulations for private pilot training and instrument proficiency emphasize the pilot's responsibility to maintain situational awareness through accurate instrument interpretation. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on one instrument without cross-checking, especially if that instrument is known to be susceptible to certain errors. For example, ignoring the magnetic compass and relying solely on a potentially malfunctioning heading indicator without verifying with other instruments would be a significant regulatory failure. Another incorrect approach is to misinterpret instrument indications, such as confusing a climb indication on the vertical speed indicator with a descent, or misjudging airspeed, which could lead to a stall or overspeed condition. Such misinterpretations directly violate the requirement to maintain safe flight parameters and demonstrate proficiency in instrument interpretation, as outlined in the training syllabus and associated regulations. A further incorrect approach is to fail to recognize or account for instrument limitations, such as the precession of a heading indicator or the lag in an altimeter during rapid altitude changes, leading to inaccurate situational awareness and potentially unsafe maneuvers. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance. This involves a continuous cycle of see and avoid, even with instruments. Interpret, decide, and act. When presented with instrument indications, the pilot must first see the readings, then interpret them in the context of the aircraft's known performance and environmental conditions, considering potential errors. Based on this interpretation, the pilot decides on the appropriate course of action, which might involve a correction, a change in procedure, or further investigation of the instrument readings. Finally, the pilot acts on the decision, making the necessary control inputs. This systematic approach, grounded in regulatory requirements for instrument proficiency and safe operation, ensures that decisions are informed, accurate, and prioritize the safety of the flight. Question 8. Investigation of a private pilot helicopter experiencing intermittent blurred vision and mild dizziness during pre-flight checks, who then decides to proceed with a routine local flight believing the symptoms are minor and will resolve in the air. What is the most appropriate course of action according to aviation regulations and ethical principles? Option A. Discuss the symptoms with a senior pilot or instructor to get their opinion before deciding whether to fly. Option B. Immediately cancel the flight and seek prompt medical evaluation for the symptoms. Option C. Proceed with the flight but limit the maneuvers to basic hovering and straight and level flight. Option D. Continue with the flight as planned, assuming the symptoms are temporary and will not affect performance. The correct answer is B. Immediately cancel the flight and seek prompt medical evaluation for the symptoms. Explanation: This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the pilot's personal desire to fly conflicting with their fundamental responsibility for the safety of themselves and any potential passengers. The pilot is experiencing symptoms that could be indicative of a serious aeromedical factor, and continuing to fly without addressing these symptoms would be a direct violation of their duty of care and aviation regulations. The ethical dilemma lies in balancing the passion for flying with the absolute requirement for fitness to fly. The correct approach involves immediately ceasing flight operations and seeking appropriate medical evaluation. This aligns with the fundamental principle of aviation safety, which prioritizes the well-being of all involved. Specifically, regulations mandate that pilots must be medically fit to operate an aircraft. Ignoring symptoms that could impair judgment, coordination, or perception directly contravenes this requirement. Ethically, a pilot has a moral obligation to ensure they are not a risk to themselves or others. Self-reporting potential medical issues is a cornerstone of maintaining aviation safety standards. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the symptoms and continue flying. This demonstrates a failure to adhere to regulatory requirements concerning medical fitness and a disregard for the ethical responsibility to ensure safety. Such an action could lead to a catastrophic accident, severe injury, or fatality, and would undoubtedly result in disciplinary action, including the potential revocation of the pilot's license. Another incorrect approach is to fly but avoid any strenuous maneuvers or complex tasks, believing this mitigates the risk. While this might seem like a compromise, it fails to acknowledge that the underlying medical condition, whatever it may be, could manifest unpredictably, and at any moment, regardless of the flight's complexity. Aviation demands full cognitive and physical capacity at all times. A third incorrect approach is to consult with a non-medical aviation professional, such as a flight instructor, about the symptoms before seeking medical advice. While a flight instructor can offer valuable guidance on flying techniques, they are not qualified to diagnose or advise on medical conditions. Relying on their opinion rather than professional medical assessment constitutes a failure to address the root cause of the potential impairment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear hierarchy of priorities: safety first, followed by regulatory compliance, and then personal desires. When faced with any doubt about one's fitness to fly, the immediate and only correct course of action is to ground oneself and seek qualified medical attention. This proactive approach ensures that the pilot upholds their professional responsibilities and maintains the integrity of the aviation system. Question 9. The monitoring system demonstrates a steady decrease in visibility and a consistent increase in wind speed as the helicopter approaches its intended landing zone, which is situated in a valley. The pilot has been tasked with a time-sensitive delivery. What is the most appropriate course of action for the private pilot helicopter? Option A. Request immediate air traffic control assistance to guide the helicopter through the valley, assuming they have better real-time weather data for the immediate vicinity. Option B. Immediately alter the flight path to a higher altitude to gain better visibility and assess alternative landing sites, or consider diverting to a predetermined alternate landing area if conditions continue to deteriorate. Option C. Initiate an immediate emergency landing in the nearest available open area within the valley, regardless of its suitability, to avoid further risk in the deteriorating conditions. Option D. Continue the current flight path and speed, relying on the helicopter's instruments to navigate through the valley, assuming the time-sensitive nature of the delivery necessitates proceeding. The correct answer is B. Immediately alter the flight path to a higher altitude to gain better visibility and assess alternative landing sites, or consider diverting to a predetermined alternate landing area if conditions continue to deteriorate. Explanation. This scenario presents a professionally challenging situation for a private pilot helicopter operator due to the inherent risks associated with low-level flight and the potential for rapid deterioration of conditions. The challenge lies in balancing the desire to complete the task with the paramount responsibility for safety. Careful judgment is required to accurately assess the evolving situation, identify potential hazards, and implement appropriate mitigation strategies without succumbing to pressure or complacency. The correct approach involves a systematic application of threat and error management (TEM) principles, which are fundamental to aviation safety. This approach begins with recognizing the developing hazard, deteriorating visibility and increasing wind, and assessing the associated risks, reduced situational awareness, potential for disorientation, increased workload, and risk of uncontrolled flight into terrain. Subsequently, effective risk mitigation strategies are employed, such as altering the flight path to a more suitable altitude or location, or even diverting to an alternate landing site. This proactive and systematic process ensures that threats are identified and managed before they can lead to errors or undesired aircraft states. This aligns with the core principles of risk management mandated by aviation regulations, which require pilots to maintain a high level of situational awareness and make sound decisions to ensure the safety of the flight. An incorrect approach that involves continuing the flight at the current altitude and speed without significant adjustments fails to adequately address the identified hazards. This demonstrates a failure in risk assessment and mitigation, potentially leading to a loss of situational awareness and an increased likelihood of an error. Such an approach disregards the pilot's responsibility to actively manage risks and could be seen as a violation of regulatory requirements to operate safely. Another incorrect approach, which involves immediately initiating an emergency landing in an unsuitable area, represents an overreaction and a failure to explore less drastic mitigation options. While safety is paramount, an immediate, unplanned emergency landing without proper assessment of the landing site can introduce new, significant risks, such as damage to the aircraft or injury to occupants. This approach bypasses a structured decision-making process and may not be the most effective way to manage the identified threats. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a continuous cycle of threat and error management. This includes 1. Threat identification, actively scanning for environmental factors, aircraft systems, or operational pressures that could compromise safety. 2. Risk assessment, evaluating the potential consequences and likelihood of each identified threat. 3. Mitigation strategy development, planning and implementing actions to reduce or eliminate the identified risks. 4. Decision-making, choosing the most appropriate course of action based on the risk assessment and available options. 5. Execution and monitoring, implementing the chosen strategy and continuously monitoring its effectiveness, remaining prepared to adapt as the situation evolves. This structured approach, grounded in TEM principles, ensures that decisions are informed, proactive, and prioritize safety. Question 10. Operational review demonstrates a discrepancy in the pre-flight weight and balance calculation for a planned private helicopter flight, indicating the helicopter may be outside its approved center of gravity, CG limits with the intended load. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the pilot? Option A. Attempt to adjust the passenger or baggage load without recalculating to bring the weight within perceived limits. Option B. Immediately cease all preparations for flight and conduct a thorough re-evaluation of the weight and balance calculation using accurate data and approved methods. Option C. Proceed with the flight, assuming the discrepancy is minor and the helicopter's inherent stability will compensate. Option D. Rely on past experience with similar loads and proceed with the flight if the helicopter has historically performed well. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the flight, assuming the discrepancy is minor and the helicopter's inherent stability will compensate. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a pilot making a critical decision regarding the safe operation of their helicopter based on incomplete or potentially inaccurate weight and balance information. The pilot must balance the desire to complete a flight with the absolute requirement to operate within the aircraft's certified limits. Failure to do so can have catastrophic consequences. The professional challenge lies in the pilot's responsibility to ensure airworthiness, which includes accurate weight and balance, even when faced with time constraints or external pressures. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves immediately ceasing any attempt to fly and thoroughly re-evaluating the weight and balance calculations. This is the only professionally responsible action because operating a helicopter outside its approved weight and balance envelope can severely compromise its flight characteristics, control, and structural integrity. The regulatory framework, such as the FAA's Part 91, for U.S.-based private pilot helicopter exams, mandates that pilots ensure the aircraft is loaded within its limits before flight. This approach prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance above all else, reflecting the pilot's ultimate responsibility for the aircraft's safe operation. Incorrect approach is analysis. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the flight, assuming the discrepancy is minor or that the aircraft can compensate. This is a direct violation of weight and balance regulations and demonstrates a severe lapse in professional judgment and adherence to safety protocols. It disregards the fundamental principles of aerodynamics and aircraft design, which are critically affected by weight and balance. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to adjust the loading without a proper understanding of the impact on the center of gravity, CG. This could inadvertently worsen the situation, moving the CG further outside the acceptable limits or creating new problems. It bypasses the systematic and calculated process required for weight and balance control. A third incorrect approach would be to rely on past experience or a gut feeling that the aircraft will be fine. While experience is valuable, it cannot replace the rigorous application of established procedures and regulatory requirements for weight and balance. This approach is subjective and inherently unsafe when objective data is available and indicates a potential problem. Professional reasoning. Professionals in aviation must adopt a systematic decision-making process that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance. When faced with uncertainty or discrepancies in critical data like weight and balance, the process should involve 1. Identify the problem. Recognize that the weight and balance calculation appears incorrect. 2. Halt operations. Do not proceed with the flight until the issue is resolved. 3. Gather information. Obtain accurate weight and fuel figures. 4. Recalculate, perform a thorough and accurate weight and balance calculation using approved methods and data. 5. Verify, double-check the calculations and compare the results against the aircraft's CG limits. 6. Consult. If unsure, consult with maintenance personnel or a qualified instructor. 7. Document, record all findings and actions taken. This structured approach ensures that decisions are based on facts and regulations, not assumptions or expediency. Question 11. The review process indicates that a private pilot operating a helicopter is preparing for takeoff on a hot and humid day at a high-elevation airport. The wind is reported as light and variable. The pilot is familiar with the helicopter and its general performance characteristics. Considering the principles of takeoff performance, which approach best ensures a safe departure? Option A. Proceed with the takeoff, assuming that the helicopter's inherent power reserves will compensate for the adverse environmental conditions. Option B. Consult the helicopter's pilot's operating handbook, PO, performance charts to determine the takeoff distance and climb performance under the current density, altitude, and wind conditions, comparing power required versus power available. Option C. Rely on personal experience and general knowledge of helicopter performance to estimate if the conditions are suitable for takeoff. Option D. Focus primarily on the light and variable wind, assuming it will have a negligible impact on takeoff performance compared to other factors. The correct answer is B. Consult the helicopter's pilot's operating handbook, PO, performance charts to determine the takeoff distance and climb performance under the current density, altitude, and wind conditions, comparing power required versus power available. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a pilot to make a critical decision regarding aircraft performance under varying environmental conditions, directly impacting safety. The challenge lies in accurately interpreting performance data and understanding its implications for safe operation, especially when conditions deviate from ideal. Careful judgment is required to prioritize safety over expediency or convenience. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of how density, altitude, wind, and aircraft weight collectively influence takeoff performance, specifically the power required versus power available. This understanding allows the pilot to consult and correctly interpret the helicopter's performance charts to determine if a safe takeoff is achievable under the given conditions. This aligns with the fundamental regulatory requirement to operate an aircraft within its performance limitations, ensuring sufficient power is available to overcome drag and achieve a safe climb rate, especially at higher density altitudes where engine and rotor efficiency are reduced. Adherence to the manufacturer's performance data and operational limitations is paramount for safe flight. An incorrect approach that relies solely on pilot experience without consulting performance charts fails to account for the precise impact of density, altitude, and wind on power margins. This is a regulatory failure as it bypasses the mandated use of manufacturer-provided performance data, which is essential for determining safe operating parameters. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes a quick departure despite adverse conditions demonstrates poor risk assessment and a disregard for the potential for inadequate climb performance, which could lead to a stall or loss of control. This is an ethical and regulatory failure, as it compromises the safety of the flight and its occupants. A third incorrect approach that assumes standard conditions, despite evidence of high temperature and humidity, ignores the significant impact of density altitude, leading to an unsafe operational decision. This is a failure to comply with the principle of operating within the aircraft's demonstrated performance envelope. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a systematic approach. First, assess all environmental factors: temperature, pressure, wind. Second, determine the aircraft's current weight. Third, calculate or determine the density altitude. Fourth, consult the helicopter's pilot's operating handbook (PO) for performance charts relevant to takeoff and climb. Fifth, compare the power required versus power available under the calculated conditions. Finally, make a go/no-go decision based on whether the performance margins are adequate for a safe takeoff and initial climb, prioritizing safety above all else. Question 12. The efficiency study reveals that a private pilot helicopter operator is seeking to reduce pre-flight planning time for cross-country flights. Considering the regulatory framework for private pilot helicopter operations, which of the following approaches best balances efficiency with the absolute priority of safety and regulatory compliance for cross-country flight planning? Option A. Prioritize route planning for the shortest distance, assuming standard airport services, and file a basic flight plan with estimated fuel burn without detailed calculations. Option B. Delegate weather briefing and NOTAM review to a third-party service, focusing personal effort on flight plan filing and activation only. Option C. Conduct a cursory review of weather forecasts and NOTAM, focusing only on the departure and destination airports, and rely on general knowledge of the route for navigation. Option D. Thoroughly review weather forecasts for the entire route and duration, analyze all relevant NOTAM, verify airport information, perform accurate weight and balance and performance calculations, and file a detailed flight plan with sufficient fuel reserves. The correct answer is C. Conduct a cursory review of weather forecasts and NOTAM, focusing only on the departure and destination airports, and rely on general knowledge of the route for navigation. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a private pilot helicopter operator to balance operational efficiency with absolute adherence to safety regulations. The pilot must not only plan a route, but also consider the dynamic nature of weather, airspace, and operational limitations, all while ensuring compliance with the private pilot helicopter syllabus requirements for cross-country flight planning. The core challenge lies in making informed decisions that prioritize safety and regulatory compliance over perceived shortcuts or cost savings. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of all available information, prioritizing regulatory compliance and safety. This includes meticulously checking weather forecasts for the entire route and duration of the flight, obtaining and analyzing all relevant NOTAM for departure, en route, and destination airports, and thoroughly reviewing airport information for any operational restrictions or hazards. Furthermore, accurate weight and balance calculations and performance calculations are essential to ensure the helicopter operates within its limitations. A detailed navigation log and a properly filed flight plan, followed by timely activation and closure, are critical for safety and air traffic control. This approach directly aligns with the fundamental principles of safe aviation practice and the specific requirements outlined in the private pilot helicopter regulatory framework, which mandates thorough pre-flight planning to mitigate risks. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness by only briefly glancing at weather and NOTAM fails to meet the regulatory requirement for a comprehensive pre-flight briefing. This oversight could lead to flying into hazardous weather or encountering unexpected airspace restrictions, jeopardizing the safety of the flight. Another incorrect approach, which involves filing a generic flight plan without detailed route information or accurate fuel calculations, demonstrates a disregard for the importance of air traffic control situational awareness and the critical need for sufficient fuel reserves, violating regulations concerning flight planning and fuel management. Lastly, an approach that neglects weight and balance calculations, assuming the helicopter is always within limits, is extremely dangerous and directly contravenes performance regulations, potentially leading to loss of control or inability to maintain safe flight. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that begins with understanding the regulatory requirements for the specific flight operation. This involves a checklist-driven approach to pre-flight planning, ensuring every aspect, from whether to NOTAM to performance, is thoroughly reviewed and understood. When faced with conflicting information or potential risks, the professional decision-making framework dictates erring on the side of caution, delaying or canceling the flight if safety cannot be assured. This proactive and compliant mindset is paramount in aviation. Question 13. Assessment of a private pilot helicopter applicant's ability to safely and precisely execute an auto-rotation to a designated landing spot following a simulated engine failure at a safe altitude, focusing on the applicant's control inputs, rotor RPM management, and decision-making in selecting the landing area. Option A. The examiner allows the applicant to complete an auto-rotation without strict adherence to the designated landing spot, prioritizing only the successful recovery of the aircraft. Option B. The examiner focuses the assessment primarily on the applicant's ability to maintain airspeed during the auto-rotation, with less emphasis on the precision of the landing. Option C. The examiner conducts the auto-rotation assessment without a clear designation of a landing spot, allowing the applicant to land in any suitable open area. Option D. The examiner observes the applicant's execution of an auto-rotation to a designated landing spot, evaluating control inputs, rotor RPM management, and decision-making regarding the landing area. The correct answer is D. The examiner observes the applicant's execution of an auto-rotation to a designated landing spot, evaluating control inputs, rotor RPM management, and decision-making regarding the landing area. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in assessing a pilot's proficiency in advanced helicopter maneuvers, specifically focusing on emergency procedures like simulated engine failures at various altitudes and auto-rotation to a specific spot. The challenge lies in evaluating not just the technical execution of the maneuver, but also the pilot's judgment, decision-making under pressure, and adherence to safety protocols. A thorough assessment requires a deep understanding of the regulatory standards for private pilot helicopter training and the inherent risks associated with these critical skills. The examiner must ensure the pilot can safely and effectively manage an engine failure, a high-risk emergency, by demonstrating control and precision in a challenging landing. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves the examiner systematically observing and evaluating the pilot's performance during a simulated engine failure scenario, requiring an auto-rotation to a designated landing spot. This approach is correct because it directly assesses the pilot's ability to execute a critical emergency procedure, as mandated by regulatory frameworks for private pilot helicopter training. Specifically, it tests the pilot's proficiency in maintaining control of the aircraft during the descent, managing rotor RPM, establishing the correct approach path, and achieving a precise touchdown at the designated spot. This aligns with the regulatory requirement to demonstrate competence in emergency procedures, ensuring the pilot can react safely and effectively in a real engine failure situation. The focus is on the pilot's judgment in selecting the landing area, their control inputs, and their ability to recover the aircraft safely, all of which are paramount for pilot certification. Incorrect approach is analysis. An incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the pilot's ability to simply complete an auto-rotation without regard to the landing spot. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for precision landing and safe recovery, which is a key component of emergency procedure training. Another incorrect approach would be to allow the pilot to deviate significantly from the designated landing spot without a valid safety reason, as this demonstrates a lack of control and precision essential for emergency landings. Furthermore, an examiner who does not adequately brief the pilot on the parameters of the simulated emergency or the expected outcome, or who fails to observe and critique the pilot's decision-making process during the maneuver, is not conducting a thorough and compliant assessment. This would violate the principles of fair and comprehensive evaluation and could lead to a pilot being certified who is not truly prepared for such an emergency. Professional reasoning. Professionals in aviation assessment must adopt a systematic and safety-centric approach. This involves clearly defining the assessment objectives based on regulatory requirements, meticulously planning the evaluation scenario, and executing the assessment with a focus on observable behaviors and decision-making. The examiner should prioritize safety throughout the process, ensuring clear communication with the pilot and maintaining a safe margin of error. A critical element is the debriefing phase, where constructive feedback is provided, reinforcing correct procedures and identifying areas for improvement. This iterative process of assessment, feedback, and refinement is crucial for developing and maintaining a high standard of pilot proficiency and ensuring aviation safety. Question 14. Upon reviewing the technical specifications for a new light helicopter intended for private pilot operation in varied environmental conditions, which aspect of rotor blade design is most critical for ensuring predictable performance and safe handling, particularly during maneuvers that approach the helicopter's operational limits? Option A. The design of the rotor head and its pitch-changing mechanisms. Option B. The composite materials used in the blade's construction. Option C. The total number of rotor blades employed. Option D. The aerodynamic profile airfoil shape of the rotor blade. The correct answer is D. The aerodynamic profile airfoil shape of the rotor blade. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for private pilot helicopter operators, understanding the fundamental principles of rotor blade design and their impact on performance and safety. The challenge lies in discerning the most critical design consideration for a specific operational environment, requiring a nuanced understanding beyond basic aerodynamic principles. A pilot must be able to connect theoretical knowledge of rotor blade design to practical implications for safe and efficient flight. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes the importance of rotor blade airfoil selection and its direct correlation with lift generation and stall characteristics. This is paramount because the airfoil profile dictates how efficiently the blade generates lift at various angles of attack and airspeed. Understanding these characteristics is crucial for predicting helicopter performance, especially in demanding flight regimes such as auto-rotation or high-speed flight, and for avoiding dangerous stall conditions. This aligns with the fundamental principles of aerodynamics and helicopter flight, which are core to private pilot helicopter training and certification. The regulatory framework for private pilot training implicitly requires a thorough understanding of these principles to ensure safe operation. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach focusing solely on the material composition of the rotor blades, while relevant to durability and weight, is secondary to the airfoil's aerodynamic function. The material does not directly dictate the lift-generating capability or stall behavior in the same way the airfoil shape does. This represents a failure to prioritize the most critical design element for flight performance and safety. An approach that prioritizes the number of rotor blades without considering their individual aerodynamic design is also flawed. While the number of blades affects overall lift and stability, the fundamental aerodynamic characteristics of each blade, determined by its airfoil, are more directly impactful on performance and safety margins. This overlooks the primary driver of lift and control. An approach that focuses on the rotor head design without a strong emphasis on the blade's aerodynamic properties is incomplete. The rotor head is a critical component for blade articulation and control, but its effectiveness is intrinsically linked to the aerodynamic performance of the blades it supports. Without understanding the blade's airfoil, the significance of the rotor head's design in optimizing performance is diminished. Professional reasoning. Professionals in aviation must adopt a systematic approach to understanding aircraft systems. This involves prioritizing fundamental principles that directly impact flight safety and performance. When evaluating rotor blade design, the airfoil's aerodynamic characteristics should be the primary focus, as they govern lift generation and stall behavior. This understanding then informs the assessment of other design elements like materials, blade count, and rotor head configuration. A pilot's decision-making process should always begin with the most fundamental principles that ensure safe and effective operation, referencing training manuals and regulatory guidance as necessary. Question 15. Compliance review shows a private pilot is preparing for night flight. Which of the following actions demonstrates the most comprehensive adherence to night flight regulations and safety best practices? Option A. Verifying the operational status of all required external aircraft lighting, confirming personal night vision adaptation, and reviewing relevant night flight regulations for the intended airspace. Option B. Ensuring all internal cockpit lighting is functioning correctly and relying on familiar daytime landmarks for navigation. Option C. Focusing solely on maintaining a stable attitude using instruments, as external visual cues are unreliable at night. Option D. Proceeding with the flight after a quick visual check of the aircraft's exterior, assuming any visual illusions will be easily managed due to experience. Correct answer is B. Ensuring all internal cockpit lighting is functioning correctly and relying on familiar daytime landmarks for navigation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for private pilots operating at night, maintaining situational awareness and adhering to regulatory requirements for night flight. Professional challenge lies in the pilot's responsibility to ensure both their own safety and the safety of any passengers by understanding and applying specific night flight regulations, recognizing potential visual illusions, and employing effective night vision and navigation techniques. The absence of a clear horizon and the reduced visual cues at night significantly increase the risk of spatial disorientation, making adherence to established procedures critical. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough pre-flight check of aircraft lighting, ensuring all required external lights, navigation lights, anti-collision lights are operational and visible. It also necessitates confirming the pilot's own night vision has adapted to the darkness and that appropriate visual scanning techniques are being employed. Furthermore, it requires a clear understanding of the specific night flight regulations applicable to the pilot's certification and the airspace being operated in, including any altitude or weather minimums. This comprehensive approach prioritizes regulatory compliance and proactive safety measures, directly addressing the inherent risks of night flight. Incorrect approaches analysis. Relying solely on the aircraft's internal cockpit lighting for navigation at night is a significant regulatory and safety failure. While cockpit lighting is essential for instrument readability, it does not compensate for the lack of external visual references needed for orientation and collision avoidance. This approach neglects the fundamental requirement for adequate external lighting and proper visual scanning techniques. Assuming that familiar daytime landmarks are sufficient for night navigation without additional aids or careful cross-referencing is also a dangerous oversight. Night conditions drastically alter the perception of familiar terrain, and relying on memory alone can lead to significant navigational errors and potential airspace violations or terrain conflicts. This approach fails to acknowledge the impact of night illusions and the need for more robust navigation strategies. Operating with the expectation that visual illusions are easily overcome without specific training or awareness is a critical failure. Night illusions, such as the autokinetic effect or the somatogravic illusion, can profoundly impact a pilot's perception of their aircraft's attitude and movement, leading to disorientation and loss of control. This approach demonstrates a lack of understanding of the physiological and psychological challenges of night flight and a failure to implement appropriate countermeasures. Professional reasoning. Professional pilots approach night operations with a heightened sense of vigilance and a commitment to rigorous adherence to regulations and best practices. The decision-making process should involve a systematic pre-flight assessment of aircraft systems, personal readiness, including night vision adaptation, and a thorough review of weather and airspace conditions. During flight, continuous monitoring of aircraft systems, diligent visual scanning, and cross-referencing navigation aids are paramount. When faced with uncertainty or potential illusions, pilots should prioritize maintaining control of the aircraft, seeking visual references when possible, and if necessary, communicating with air traffic control for assistance. The overarching principle is to mitigate risk through preparation, adherence to regulations, and a proactive, safety-first mindset. Question 16. Performance analysis shows that a private pilot, preparing for a routine flight, discovers a minor discrepancy in the helicopter's tail rotor control linkage during the pre-flight inspection. The discrepancy is not listed as a critical item in the pilot's checklist, but it is not explicitly covered by any recent airworthiness directives. The pilot is aware that a scheduled maintenance check is due in approximately 10 flight hours. What is the most appropriate course of action for the pilot to ensure compliance with aviation regulations and maintain the highest standard of safety? Option A. Attempt to adjust the tail rotor control linkage himself, as it appears to be a simple mechanical issue that can be rectified quickly. Option B. Document the discrepancy in the maintenance logbook and consult with a certified helicopter maintenance technician to determine the appropriate corrective action before flight. Option C. Proceed with the flight as the discrepancy is minor and not explicitly covered by an airworthiness directive, planning to address it after the scheduled maintenance. Option D. Ignore the discrepancy, assuming it is insignificant and will not affect the helicopter's performance during the flight. The correct answer is B. Document the discrepancy in the maintenance logbook and consult with a certified helicopter maintenance technician to determine the appropriate corrective action before flight. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the critical nature of helicopter maintenance and its direct impact on flight safety. The pilot must exercise sound judgment in balancing operational demands with regulatory compliance and the inherent risks associated with aviation. The core of the challenge lies in accurately assessing the significance of a discovered discrepancy and determining the appropriate course of action, which could range from immediate rectification to deferral under specific conditions, all while adhering to strict regulatory requirements. Correct approach involves a thorough understanding of the helicopter's maintenance program, applicable airworthiness directives and the pilot's responsibilities regarding maintenance records and pilot-performed maintenance. Specifically, it requires the pilot to meticulously review the maintenance logbook, cross-reference any discovered discrepancies with the helicopter's approved maintenance program and any outstanding ADs, and accurately document all findings and actions taken. This ensures that the helicopter remains airworthy and that all maintenance is performed or supervised by appropriately qualified personnel, as mandated by aviation regulations. The pilot's role in identifying and addressing maintenance issues before flight is a fundamental aspect of ensuring the safety of the operation. An incorrect approach that involves deferring a known maintenance issue without proper authorization or documentation is a serious regulatory and ethical failure. This bypasses the established procedures for addressing discrepancies, potentially compromising the airworthiness of the aircraft and endangering the lives of those on board. It demonstrates a disregard for the regulatory framework designed to ensure aviation safety and a failure to uphold the pilot's duty of care. Another incorrect approach, such as performing maintenance beyond the scope of pilot-performed maintenance without the necessary certification or supervision, constitutes a violation of regulations governing who can perform specific maintenance tasks. This can lead to improper repairs, further damage to the aircraft, and a false sense of security regarding its airworthiness. It undermines the integrity of the maintenance system and the overall safety of flight. Finally, an incorrect approach that involves ignoring a discovered discrepancy and proceeding with flight is the most egregious failure. This directly contravenes the pilot's primary responsibility to ensure the aircraft is safe for flight. It represents a complete disregard for regulatory requirements, ethical obligations, and the fundamental principles of aviation safety, potentially leading to catastrophic consequences. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, identify and clearly understand the nature of the discrepancy. Second, consult the aircraft's maintenance manual, approved maintenance program, and any relevant airworthiness directives. Third, determine if the discrepancy falls within the scope of pilot-performed maintenance or requires the attention of a certified maintenance technician. Fourth, document all findings and actions meticulously in the maintenance records. Fifth, if there is any doubt regarding airworthiness, err on the side of caution and do not operate the aircraft until the issue is resolved and airworthiness is confirmed. Question 17. Implementation of a pre-flight planning process for a private pilot helicopter operation requires careful consideration of aircraft performance. When assessing the feasibility of operating from a specific helipad at a high-density altitude location on a hot day, which of the following approaches best reflects regulatory compliance and professional judgment regarding takeoff performance? Option A. Using takeoff performance data from a different helicopter model that is known to have similar power output. Option B. Assuming the aircraft will perform adequately as long as the takeoff weight is within the maximum gross weight limit, without specific performance calculations for the given density, altitude, and temperature. Option C. Estimating takeoff distance based on past experience flying similar helicopters in similar conditions, without consulting the POH. Option D. Consulting the aircraft's pilot's operating handbook, PO, for density, altitude, takeoff distance, and climb performance charts, and applying a conservative margin to the calculated requirements based on the prevailing conditions and aircraft weight. The correct answer is D. Consulting the aircraft's pilot's operating handbook, PO, for density, altitude, takeoff distance, and climb performance charts, and applying a conservative margin to the calculated requirements based on the prevailing conditions and aircraft weight. Explanation: Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for private pilot helicopter operations, ensuring safe flight planning and execution under varying environmental conditions. The professional challenge lies in the pilot's responsibility to accurately assess and account for factors that significantly impact aircraft performance, particularly takeoff and landing distances and climb rates. Failure to do so can lead to a critical loss of performance margin, potentially resulting in an undershoot of the intended landing area or an inability to clear obstacles during takeoff or climb. This requires not just a theoretical understanding of performance charts, but also the disciplined application of these principles in a real-world context where conditions may not perfectly match the idealized data. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and conservative application of performance data derived from the aircraft's pilot's operating handbook (PO) or equivalent approved documentation. This includes calculating density altitude, which is a critical factor affecting engine power, rotor efficiency, and air density. Based on the calculated density altitude, the pilot must then consult the POH for specific takeoff and landing distance charts, as well as climb performance data, under the prevailing weight and atmospheric conditions. A conservative interpretation of these charts, often involving adding a safety margin, is essential. This approach is directly mandated by regulations such as the FAA's Part 91, or equivalent for the specified jurisdiction, which requires pilots to be familiar with and operate within the limitations of their aircraft, including performance capabilities. Adhering to POH data and applying a margin of safety aligns with the ethical obligation to prioritize the safety of passengers and the aircraft. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to rely solely on general experience or feel for the aircraft's performance without consulting the POH. This is a significant regulatory failure as it bypasses the approved performance data that forms the basis of the aircraft certification and safe operating limits. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of due diligence and an unacceptable reliance on subjective judgment over objective, validated data. Another incorrect approach is to use performance charts for a different aircraft type or a significantly different weight configuration than the one being operated. This is a direct violation of regulatory requirements to operate within the aircraft's specified limitations. Performance data is specific to the aircraft's design and configuration, and using incorrect data renders any calculations meaningless and potentially dangerous. Ethically, it is negligent and exposes the flight to undue risk. A third incorrect approach is to ignore or downplay the impact of adverse weather conditions, such as high temperatures or significant winds, on performance. While the POH charts account for standard atmospheric conditions, pilots are required to adjust for deviations. Failing to do so, or assuming the aircraft will perform as it does on a standard day, is a regulatory oversight and an ethical lapse in risk management. Professional reasoning. Professionals in aviation employ a structured decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance. This framework typically involves 1. Information gathering, thoroughly reviewing all relevant data including weather forecasts, NOTAM, aircraft weight and balance, and the POH. 2. Risk assessment, identifying potential hazards and their impact on the planned operation with a particular focus on performance limitations. 3. Decision-making, selecting the safest course of action based on the gathered information and risk assessment, always erring on the side of caution when performance margins are reduced. 4. Execution and monitoring, implementing the chosen plan while continuously monitoring aircraft performance and environmental conditions, being prepared to adjust or abort the flight if necessary. This systematic approach ensures that all critical factors are considered, leading to informed and safe operational decisions. Question 18. Which approach would be most appropriate for a private pilot helicopter experiencing an uncommanded and complete engine failure at a low altitude over a populated area? Option A. Immediately turn towards the nearest open field, even if it requires a significant change in heading, to ensure a landing away from populated areas, and then initiate auto-rotation. Option B. Immediately initiate auto-rotation to the nearest suitable landing area while simultaneously attempting to troubleshoot the engine failure according to the emergency checklist. Option C. Attempt to restart the engine by cycling the fuel control and ignition switches, as per the engine failure checklist, before considering any landing maneuvers. Option D. Declare an emergency on the radio and request immediate assistance from air traffic control to identify a safe landing zone, delaying any control inputs until instructions are received. Correct answer is B. Immediately initiate auto-rotation to the nearest suitable landing area while simultaneously attempting to troubleshoot the engine failure according to the emergency checklist. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it demands immediate decisive action under extreme stress, with pilot safety and the safety of those on the ground being paramount. The pilot must rapidly assess a critical in-flight emergency, prioritize actions, and execute them flawlessly, often with limited information and time. The challenge lies in maintaining situational awareness, recalling and applying emergency procedures accurately, and making sound judgments that mitigate risk. The correct approach involves a systematic and prioritized response to the engine failure, adhering strictly to the established emergency checklist and auto-rotation procedures. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the immediate threat to aircraft control and survival. The pilot's primary responsibility is to maintain control of the aircraft and execute a safe landing. Following the checklist ensures that critical steps are not missed, and the auto-rotation procedure is the established method for a controlled descent and landing without engine power. This aligns with the fundamental principles of aviation safety and the regulatory requirements for pilot training and emergency preparedness, emphasizing the preservation of life and aircraft. An incorrect approach that prioritizes attempting to restart the engine without first establishing a stable auto-rotation would be professionally unacceptable. This is because the immediate loss of engine power in a helicopter creates a rapidly deteriorating situation where control can be lost quickly. Laying the establishment of auto-rotation to troubleshoot the engine could lead to a loss of airspeed and rotor RPM, making a controlled landing impossible. This failure to prioritize immediate aircraft control and survivability violates the core tenets of emergency procedure training and regulatory mandates for pilot action in such events. Another incorrect approach, such as attempting to fly to a distant, more desirable landing site instead of selecting the nearest suitable landing area, would also be professionally unacceptable. While a pilot might desire a more controlled landing environment, the primary objective in an engine failure is to land safely as soon as possible. Attempting to extend the flight path significantly increases the risk of losing control due to insufficient rotor RPM or airspeed, or encountering unforeseen obstacles. This demonstrates a failure to prioritize immediate safety over secondary considerations, which is a critical ethical and regulatory failing in emergency management. A professional decision-making process in such a situation involves 1. Aviate, maintain aircraft control. 2. Navigate, determine a landing direction. 3. Communicate, declare the emergency if time and control permit. In this specific scenario, the immediate priority is aviate by initiating auto-rotation. The decision-making framework emphasizes immediate action to preserve control and survivability, followed by executing the most appropriate landing procedure based on the available options and the aircraft's condition. Question 19. The analysis reveals that a private pilot helicopter is preparing for a visual flight rules, VFR, cross-country flight. The pilot has reviewed the METR for the departure airport, which indicates clear skies and light winds. However, the pilot has not yet consulted any aviation weather services for en route forecasts or advisories, nor has the pilot reviewed the destination airport's weather or any pilot reports, PIRP, concerning the intended route. The pilot is aware that thunderstorms have been developing in the general area, which approach to pre-flight weather assessment best aligns with regulatory requirements and professional aviation safety standards for this scenario. Option A. Contact a fellow pilot who recently flew in the general area to get their informal assessment of the weather conditions. Option B. Rely on personal experience and knowledge of the area to estimate the weather conditions along the route, as formal weather briefings can be time-consuming. Option C. Proceed with the flight after a brief review of the departure airport's METR, assuming the clear conditions will persist along the route. Option D. Obtain a comprehensive weather briefing from an aviation weather service, including current conditions, forecasts, PIRP, and advisories for the entire route and destination, and make a go/no-go decision based on this information and personal minimums. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the flight after a brief review of the departure airport's METR, assuming the clear conditions will persist along the route. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a pilot to synthesize multiple, potentially conflicting, weather elements and make a critical go/no-go decision that directly impacts safety. Pilot must not only understand the individual weather phenomena, but also their combined effect and the implications for helicopter operations, which are often more sensitive to certain weather conditions than fixed-wing aircraft. The decision involves balancing the desire to complete the flight with the absolute requirement to avoid hazardous weather. The correct approach involves a comprehensive weather briefing that prioritizes aviation safety regulations and guidelines. This approach is right because it systematically addresses all relevant weather factors, including current conditions, forecasts, and potential hazards, as mandated by aviation regulations. Specifically, for a private pilot helicopter in the U.S., this aligns with FAR 91-103 per flight action, which requires pilots to familiarize themselves with all available weather information for the intended route. It also aligns with the general principles of aeronautical decision-making, ADAM, by encouraging a thorough evaluation of all factors before flight. The pilot must actively seek and interpret information from aviation weather services, understanding that the ultimate responsibility for determining the airworthiness of the flight rests with them. This proactive and thorough evaluation ensures compliance with the see and avoid principle extended to weather hazards. An incorrect approach that relies solely on a quick glance at a single weather product, such as only checking the METR for the departure airport, fails to provide a complete picture. This is a regulatory failure because it neglects the requirement for a comprehensive pre-flight weather briefing covering the entire route and destination, including forecasts. It also represents a failure in professional judgment by not considering potential en route hazards or the dynamic nature of weather. Another incorrect approach, which involves proceeding with the flight based on a personal feeling or a desire to avoid disappointing a passenger, is ethically and regulatorily unsound. This disregards the pilot's primary responsibility for the safety of the flight and its occupants. It bypasses the systematic evaluation of weather data and ADM principles, potentially leading to a situation where the pilot encounters hazardous conditions they are not equipped to handle, violating FAR 91-103 and the fundamental duty of care. A further incorrect approach, which is to assume that because a flight was completed successfully in similar conditions previously, it will be safe again, is a dangerous form of complacency. This ignores the inherent variability of weather and the specific conditions of the current flight. It is a failure to conduct a proper pre-flight assessment and demonstrates a lack of adherence to the principle that each flight must be evaluated independently based on the most current information. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured ADM model. This typically includes identifying the problem, e.g., adverse weather, assessing the hazards, e.g., thunderstorms, low visibility, evaluating the risks associated with each hazard, considering alternatives, e.g., delaying, rerouting, canceling, making the decision, and implementing the plan. This iterative process, grounded in regulatory requirements and a commitment to safety, ensures that all relevant factors are considered before a flight commences. Question 20. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a private pilot helicopter is scheduled for a scenic flight with a passenger who is anxious about potential turbulence. The pilot notes that the forecast indicates a possibility of light to moderate turbulence, and the cloud base is slightly lower than ideal for a comfortable VFR flight. The passenger expresses a strong desire to proceed with the flight, stating they have traveled a long distance and are concerned about rescheduling. The pilot has the option to proceed, suggest a different flight path that might avoid some turbulence but reduce the scenic value, or postpone the flight. Option A. Suggest a modified flight path that avoids the forecast turbulence but significantly alters the intended scenic route, hoping to satisfy the passenger's desire to fly while reducing perceived risk. Option B. Proceed with the flight as planned, assuring the passenger that the helicopter is capable of handling the conditions and that the pilot is experienced. Option C. Politely explain to the passenger that the current weather conditions present a risk that cannot be mitigated to an acceptable level for a safe and enjoyable flight, and offer to reschedule for a time with more favorable weather. Option D. Delegate the decision-making authority to the passenger, asking them if they would prefer to proceed or postpone, given the weather information. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the flight as planned, assuring the passenger that the helicopter is capable of handling the conditions and that the pilot is experienced. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent risks associated with operating a helicopter in marginal weather conditions, particularly when a passenger's comfort and perceived urgency are factors. The pilot must balance the passenger's desires with the paramount responsibility for the safety of the flight and its occupants. This requires a strong ethical compass, adherence to regulations, and sound judgment, as deviating from established safety protocols for passenger convenience can have severe consequences. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves prioritizing safety and regulatory compliance above all else. This means conducting a thorough risk assessment, considering all available weather information, and making a decision based on whether the flight can be conducted safely within the established parameters of the private pilot helicopter syllabus and relevant regulations. If the conditions are not conducive to a safe flight, the pilot must communicate this clearly and professionally to the passenger, explaining the rationale and offering alternative solutions, such as rescheduling or delaying the flight. This upholds the pilot's duty of care and adherence to aviation safety standards. Incorrect approach is analysis. Continuing the flight in marginal weather without a clear safety margin or adequate justification for deviating from standard operating procedures is a failure to uphold the pilot's primary responsibility for safety. This approach disregards the potential for deteriorating conditions and the increased workload and risk associated with flying in such an environment, potentially violating regulations concerning visual flight rules, VFR, minimums and piloting command authority, suggesting a less experienced pilot take over the flight to accommodate the passenger's request, without a proper handover of all relevant information and a clear understanding of the risks, is an abdication of responsibility. This could lead to an unsafe situation if the other pilot is not fully briefed or is also pressured to compromise safety. It also potentially violates regulations regarding pilot competency and responsibility for the aircraft. Ignoring the passenger's concerns and proceeding with the flight without adequate communication or consideration for their comfort, while potentially safe from a purely technical standpoint, demonstrates poor CRM, crew resource management, and customer service. While safety is paramount, a professional pilot should strive to manage passenger expectations and concerns effectively, fostering trust and understanding. This approach, while not directly regulatory noncompliance, can lead to future issues and reflects a lack of holistic professionalism. Professional reasoning. Professionals in aviation must employ a systematic decision-making process that begins with a comprehensive risk assessment. This involves identifying potential hazards, e.g., weather, aircraft limitations, passenger influence, evaluating the associated risks, and implementing control measures to mitigate those risks. When faced with conflicting priorities, such as passenger requests versus safety, the pilot must adhere to the hierarchy of controls, with safety and regulatory compliance always taking precedence. Clear, honest, and professional communication with passengers is crucial throughout this process. The pilot's authority as the piloting command is absolute when it comes to the safety of the flight.